welcome in everybody, and welcome to this Raise the Game powered by Yuki special effects stream, where we are going to be taking a look at accessibility in gaming and technology with special guests from Special Effect and from Yuki and from Rare. So, I am Paige. If you've not met me before, I am Special Effects Gaming Community Manager. I am the nerd that runs our social channels and our live streams, and pretty much anywhere that you find gaming or anything to do with streaming is exactly where you find me. We're going to get on very quickly with introductions because we are running a tiny bit late. So thank you all for your patience. And let's start with Sachin. Sachin, my love, could you introduce yourself and just a little bit about what you do?
Sachin. I'm one of the occupational therapists that work at Special Effect. I work mainly within the Stargaze project that we have. I work in a lot of intensive care units, ICUs, um, just getting people who want access back to their technology again following an incident or accident that they've been involved in.
Brill, thank you very much. Dom, welcome. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi everyone, I'm Dom Shaw. I'm the EDI, which stands for Equality, Diversity, Inclusion Coordinator at Yuki, which fundamentally we drive all of our EDI activity through Raise the Game, which is an initiative all about amplifying that in the greater industry and working with partners like Special Effect and Rare.
Beautifully described. Thank you very much. And last but absolutely not least, for now until we find Jacob, Topher, could you please introduce yourself?
Hello there, I'm Topher Winwood. I'm a software engineer and accessibility advocate working at Rare Limited on Sea of Thieves. I've worked in quite a few areas at Rare, so I've worked in the gameplay teams, in the UI, currently on the live services. But throughout, I've been doing a lot of work like sharing education around how do we make our games accessible, sometimes building features in, and a lot of collaboration with people like Special Effect to make sure that our team is, know as much as they can to be able to make those inclusive games.
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. So yes, that is what we are going to be doing today. We're going to be showing you a number of different slides. We've got a video, and at the end of the stream, we will be doing a Q&A section. So if you do have any questions about anything we're talking about, accessibility, gaming, all those kinds of things, pop your questions in the chat. We will be gathering them all up, and then we will be answering them at the end of this stream. This video will also be put onto YouTube at a future date, so you will be able to come back and refer to any questions that you have asked. There we go. Do we feel ready to get started, everybody? Brill. Right, so we are going to be starting with Dom's section. So let's see if I've managed to do this correctly. And click this button. Oh my goodness, look, it works. Fantastic. Right, so Dom, over to you. Let me know when you'd like me to move slides.
Amazing. So, as I briefly made the intro to myself, I won't need to do too much of that. But today I wanted to just really expand upon what I mentioned, which is looking at how Raise the Game is helping lead the way around equality, diversity, inclusion to make the games industry a more accessible place for everyone, which includes collaborations like today's stream. Next slide, please. So again, just a bit of an expansion on who I am. I've been running Raise the Game since it launched back in February 2020, and I've been the EDI coordinator for a bit shorter of a time because originally I came into Yuki as maternity cover office manager, but when we went into lockdown, this work needed someone to help it along and champion it. So I quickly juggled some hoops and got on to this work, and I ended up really loving it and excelling it to the point where I fundamentally created my own role. And I've been doing it ever since, and I'm grateful to say I've been recognised for some of that work over the years, whether that's through the Develop Star Awards or MCV Develop 30 Under 30. But it all in the mission to make games a much welcoming, accessible place for everyone. Because, as I kind of briefly highlight on this slide, openly gay or LG plus. I'm a hot pot of neurodivergency, so autistic, dyslexic with traces of OCD and ADHD, and I come from a low socioeconomic background, so I very much kind of the motions and feelings that a lot of players have. I've brought that into my work. I've used that to gain more knowledge and really expand what can be done to support the wider industry. Next slide, please. So, with that in mind, I've also just looking at a particular lens of the neurodiversity aspect. Before I joined Yuki in 2020 to forward the work that I'm currently doing, I also joined a charity called Autistica back in 2019, and that's where my advocacy and my eye for supporting charities really properly started. Specifically, their Autistica Play initiative, which is all about supporting autistic people to work and have positive experiences in the games industry, which has again led to me meeting other charities across the spectrum who support both accessibility and those with either neurodivergence or disabilities, such as SpecialEffect, Light Lives, Everyone Can, and many more, who you'll shortly see in a minute. But that's foreshadowing for a future slide. So next slide, please. So kind of again to give people a bit more of a rounded image of what Raise the Game is, I have kind of just laid out some bullet points on here, but obviously, just to kind of give people that retrospective, Raise the Game is an award-winning, holistic-driven initiative aimed at improving and supporting the wider games industry across all aspects of EDI, powered by Yuki. It is Yuki's, as an organization, Raise the Game is its delivery mechanic and its commitment to this work. So fundamentally, especially over the next year, because Raise the Game turns 5 in 2025. So people will hopefully be seeing the brand and such more. But this stream today was kind of a intro to some of that, but also just again showing off some of what we've done, but also emphasizing the importance of how accessibility plays into it. But some of the aspects that the initiative does widely for the games industry includes facilitating activities and events that are aimed at creating positive and meaningful change, having daily comms and engagements with over 200 game businesses and organizations outside of games, whether that's charities or industries thinking about coming into the video game ecosystem, such as Scope and Mermaids are some examples. There's also a pledge element where companies commit to engage and take responsibility to grow and develop best practices around EDI for the betterment of their people. And we consider ourselves a support network that offers consultancy and resources such as our Empower Up Toolkit platform and our Raise the Game monthly newsletter. Empower Up is a comprehensive EDI resource which, regardless whether you're at the start of your learnings around EDI or if you're really advanced, we have resources for everyone, and it's built for both individuals and companies alike. So if you haven't heard of it before, I'm happy to say we should still be number one in the SEO. So just type in Power Up, potentially resources, and we should come up as your first result. And then the Raise the Game monthly newsletter has been going on for about 3 to 4 years. It's all about highlighting the good, impactful stories that our partners and supporters are doing. So, SpecialEffect, for example, have featured several times for their numerous occasions, whether that's Game Blast or One Special Day, and other organisations, both for what they've done around accessibility, but also other areas, whether that be gender, mental health, or etc. And if anyone is looking for a link for that, you should be able to go to the Raise the Game website and gain access to subscribe to the newsletter. Next slide, please. And then this one is very much, this slide is just to show an example of just the pure volume of organisations we've worked with. I'm not going to go through them all, but for anyone who has any inkling to the games industry from a ecosystem perspective, you may see many companies that you recognise, or some that you don't. Definitely all of them in their own different ways. We've got companies like Activision Blizzard King, Jagex, who we work directly with through various activities and initiatives. And then there's organisations like Xbox and PlayStation that we have regular engagement with to ensure what they're doing and what we're doing around EDI is pushed forward. And then there's many charities and excuse me, and CICs that we support, such as Limit Break, RNIB, again, some of the ones I mentioned before, like Light Life, Everyone Can, Blind Burners, so many organisations. And that includes SpecialEffect as well, which again, really proud of to do. And yeah, it is just quite amazing when you actually look at how many connections we have and how much more we can have, because there are plenty more companies that I'm missing from this slide. But obviously, hopefully, if you're intrigued in learning more about those partnerships and collaborations, you'll look up Raise the Game more if this is brand new to you. Next slide, please. And with that in mind, obviously, Raise the Game is an initiative that drives EDI for Yuki, and some people might be new to what Yuki is. And Yuki is the trade body for UK games and interactive entertainment. So we're a not-for-profit that represents over 2,000 game businesses, whether that's micro studios, developers, publishers, service providers, and doesn't matter what platforms they're working on, whether that's online, mobile, console, or even esports and immersive / VR, AR. We're there to support over 73,000 jobs across the UK, and our mission is to supercharge the future of the games industry. So that not only means empowering inclusion, but that also means creating more ways to access finance and how to actually recruit and retain talent within the industry. Um, we have multiple teams, so I look after all the inclusion work, and then I have colleagues who do policy and public affairs, education, and there are some that do the core membership, because to support Yuki's activities to support the wider industry, we are, as our main source of finance, we have a membership model, but that doesn't mean we're not exploring other sources of finance as well for ourselves and for our partners. So Yuki, although it's small, are making impactful waves across industry. And again, one of those moves included creating our first ever awards this year, which again, you again, people might be like, "Oh, Dol, you're such a shameless plugger." It's just like, well, when you've got the mic, you might as well. But I was really happy that SpecialEffect won our first Diversity and Inclusion Award this year at our first Yuki Awards, which is again what's inspired this collaboration, because I was just like, I need to do something with them to celebrate this a moment, and eventually we are through today. Next slide, please. And so, with that in mind, again, just to give people a bit more expansion on what actually EDI is, again, really can vary because there are multiple acronyms. Some people may have heard of DEI, DNI. There's also JEDI, which is Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion. But unless you want a Disney copyright on you, I would avoid using that externally and only keep that as an internal name, and other acronyms. But the fundamental cause of this work is to ensure that people and work cultures are maximized. So that means giving everyone equal access and opportunities in line with their needs, and a fair balance between people and protecting people from being discriminated. That also means having people's recognizes their differences and what makes them unique, and overall having variety in the workforce, and inclusion, which is all about making people feel welcomed and a part of what's happening and participating and really being a part of whether that's a company and or the greater industry. Next slide, please. And so, with that, some of you might be thinking, what does EDI mean for video games? Next slide, please. And so, with that in mind, the key aspects of what that means for video games is equity. Everyone feels fairly treated. Everyone has opportunities and unbiased approaches. Now, that's not to say that's perfectly aligned across the industry right now, but that's the ambition. And if we don't continue to make that momentum and implementation to create that atmosphere, it will only slow down. And that's not what we want. We want to ensure everyone, regardless background or personal experience, has the opportunity, because games are a amazing industry that can be for everyone with the right time and effort. And that's why, again, including people, making them feel included, allows everyone to be embraced and not feel like they're shunned from the wider society and or community. And having this also makes variety. As they say, it's the spice of life. Having many different people from different backgrounds and being respected and valued for who they are is vital to games, because many people might think a game director or a lead person on a game directs and manages every aspect, but actually the games industry is a very collaborative and teamwork driven sector where that communication, that engagement is vital, and having people from all different backgrounds adds to that rather than subtracts. So it's vital to embed this across the workplaces in video games. Next slide, please. But then some of you might have been thinking right now, where does accessibility fit into the picture? Next slide, please. And so what this means for accessibility is it perfectly aligns with EDI. It can even be, you can even add it to the acronym. It would make the best acronym I've made from it so far is IDEA. But if, like me, your organization has a data and insights team, that might confuse things. But I absolutely consider accessibility core to the experience, because amplifies the core nature of inclusion. It ensures that people feel like they are a part of the games more, because implementing accessible features, having controllers that can be remapped and or have a range of controllers that people, depending on their needs, can use, allows more people to get to play games, but also it allows for companies to be able to offer a greater range of reasonable adjustments in the workplace. It's also quite empowering, especially for those with disabilities and neurodiverse conditions. As I say, being autistic myself when I was younger, I never really truly found an outlet until playing games where I felt free, no risks of being shunned, could always actually play and be involved. And as I've gotten older, there's a level of independence, and having talked to many others across the board, whether they're a player or work in industry, there's a great independence to playing games, and that's such an empowering element for various reasons. And I think the biggest thing for me is options. Accessibility provides players and developers alike with choices and options that craft experiences they want, which makes accessibility key to the puzzle to ensure the industry is people centric, develops healthy workplaces, and we strive to make games and gaming for everyone. Next slide, please. And so, what Raise the Game does around accessibility to really capture those values is we facilitate resources. So on your left, you may see a banner for Empower Up, which I mentioned a bit earlier. It's our key resource all about supporting the UK games industry on its EDI journey. We have an accessibility section there where we highlight articles, resources, and guidance that people can start considering. It's still growing as a resource, so over time, there might be certain sections that you may see that might not be as fully fleshed out as others, but we definitely want to change that. And again, working with the likes of SpecialEffect, but also other organisations such as Gina Davis Institute, who we worked with on their playbook resource, which is all about champion inclusive design and accessibility. These elements really help push the mark further along and brings about greater knowledge sharing and aligns people with what's important. And what's even better with Empower Up is we completely did it in collaboration. So it's not directly just raised the game. We worked with Amicus, who are a specialized recruiter in industry, who have a massive advocacy for EDI. Liz Prince, who's their amazing business manager, me and her started working on Empower Up basically a few months after I started the EDI work at Yuki, and from there we saw a gap in the market, and we wanted to come together to not only bring that gap and fill it, but actually that collaborative nature is what really makes for powerful, impactful work, and that's what makes it sustainable as well, because instead of one place owning it, it's actually co-led and drives that change together. And we are always looking for more organizations to help via content or news stories. So if you get a chance, do look at Empower Up and look at our accessibility section. And if there's things on there that you don't see, let us know, and either be one of the people who might contribute to making that content, or talk to us and let us know. The other big thing that we've facilitated, which this live stream itself is a part of, is Access November. I started Access November 2 years ago. It's a biennial EDI campaign all about championing accessibility and empowering disabled and neurodiverse communities. So, in its first iteration, it was for 2 weeks. It started around the same time as now, because here in the UK, we've just entered Disability History Month. So it makes for a perfect alignment to really knuckle down on that focus, because a lot of companies are kind of finishing up their key projects for to release before Christmas, or they've just released their big projects and are looking to go into their next project. And that's kind of perfectly aligned, because the ones that are working on their big projects now, when they stop, all this resource around accessibility and this messaging can be picked up by them afterwards. And before they start the next project, they can really think about some of these concepts and really imply them from the get-go, because it's so much easier to drive accessibility from the start rather than trying to retrofit it in later as add-ons or post-launch content. Although that's still not to say that's not appreciated and valued, because there are many games that have amplified who can access them with that feature as well. But obviously, it's always better to drive that forward as early as possible. And the other end of it is obviously those that companies that have just stopped their big projects can really lean into this guidance straight away and be a part of Access November. Alongside this live stream, this year we did a accessibility symposium on Tuesday the 19th with Tencent, and we did an accessible video game jobs webinar yesterday with SICK, who are an organisation that are all about empowering disabled and neurodivergent professionals. So it's really all about championing that content that only benefits people's play, but also their work environments. Next slide, please. And so the other end of accessibility that we look at is event partnerships. And I've really had the pleasure to say we've been able to work with both AbilitiesNet's TechShare Pro and the GA conference over the last couple of years in different capacities. So we've had a partnership with TechShare Pro for the last 2 years. Back in 2022, where we facilitated a video game panel, which you can watch on their YouTube channel. And then we also facilitated some micro talks for that year. And then last year we were able to do a full in-person hybrid conversation, which again is viewable on the TechShare Pro YouTube, which again maybe as post-event content, or when I'm listening to the other great speakers on the stream, maybe we can post it in the chat so people can get those links for after stream watching. Yeah. But then there's also the GA conference, where we've been signposting and promoting all the Europe and US versions that they have had over the last 2 years, and hopefully can do more going forward. But that is, again, just for people that don't know either event, TechShare Pro is Europe's largest accessibility conference or meetup, and it is a great activity to see who within the tech and wider sectors are really putting a priority on accessibility, while GA Conference is ideally the number one accessibility event in the games industry globally, which again is run by a fantastic team who really champion and want to make sure accessibility is core to the games industry ecosystem. Next slide, please. And so the kind of final angle that I'd love to highlight around what we've done around accessibility and Raise the Game is we've helped facilitate really powerful moments. So last year we helped many cats facilitate their first year of their Impact initiative, which is all about celebrating disabled and neurodiverse talent in the games industry. So that was really great, and that's a deep one to my heart. We may not be a part of it this year, but there is an amazing cohort of talent that they're showcasing. Definitely one to look up. And again, there might be other ways to support, and we're always up for highlighting good talent, regardless where we might be on the activity collaboration scale. And then the other activity we were able to do this year is we worked with Carrie, who's the senior designer of accessibility at Rebellion. We worked with Sunderland College and also Next Gen Skills Academy to facilitate what we called the EDI Impact Day. So this was where me and Carrie went into Sunderland College, and we taught a classroom of students the importance of inclusion and accessibility for their game projects. So we did a presentation in the morning. We then sat with we sat with different groups of students throughout the lunchtime period, and then we went back and forth and helped them kind of incorporate what we had showed them in the presentation into their actual work on the day, to then get small presentations by the students at the end to see what they've learned. And just the night and day difference of that was extraordinary, because we literally had like a classroom of 25 students, and only like one or two of them really understood what accessibility was. And by the end, there was quite a lot of students. I think most of the class got it, and are still to this day, from continued conversations with the Sunderland College team, still some of those students are implementing accessibility into their project. So it's a real pilot of what can be done through the power of collaboration, and going to places early and really teaching them those core skills and highlighting that as a fundamental to games, because again, inclusion and accessibility only empower our products and our services than hinder. Next slide, please. And so you might be all thinking, what are the ambitions of EDI and accessibility work? Is it all just a pipe dream for video games? Next slide. Which I can easily say with my next slide is absolutely not. It is going to be a lot of hard work, which no doubt Paige might relate to with all my next sliding, which includes next slide now. But again, like how much appreciative I am of the efforts and knowing it can be hard work, it's all not in vain. Next slide, please. Because we can encourage, empower, and inspire each other to achieve the change we want, so we can successfully work hard and play hard, which I think this image perfectly demonstrates. Don't know the young lady in the photo, but I just absolutely love her vibe. And also, it's copyright free. But no, it's banter aside, it is a vital, important message because, in this work, it is tough to drive accessibility and drive inclusion, but actually, it's all at the end of the day to benefit people and cultures. And as long as that life work balance comes first, and it's really important to make that notion of life first rather than work first, because by putting work always first, you're always going to push the life elements to yourself lesser. So actually, and it's just a lesson I've learned myself, by ensuring that life and your kind of overall health and who you are is fundamental to your values and how you go forward, you'll always find a sense of happiness, but also those authentic elements to working in a healthy environment and really driving that positive action become more embedded into who you are and can be shared and blossom in the workplace and inspire others. So it's a mantra that's very easier said than done, but equally it just plays such dividends to really doing this work, and hopefully I've been able to show that. But nevertheless, I massively appreciate people's time hearing about Raise the Game, what we're doing in the space, and just to conclude my section, next slide please, is to say massive thank you for all listening. Obviously, sticking around for the rest of the stream, but more than happy to say that it's come to the end for my section. But don't worry, there's going to be some great content ahead, especially from others from the Special Effect team talking about what they're doing. So yeah, that's me. So I'll pass back to Paige now.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dom, for that brilliant introduction and sort of explanation of what it is that we're talking about here today. What we're going to do, everyone, is quickly go to our Be Right Back screen while we go and get in the lovely Jacob, who is going to be talking about the dev kit and a couple of other topics to do with Special Effect. So bear with us, and remember, if you do have any questions about anything that we're discussing here today, pop them in the chat at any time and we'll be discussing them at the end of the stream. So we will see you in just a moment. Hello, everybody. We are back. Thank you for bearing with us. And I am now joined by the lovely Jacob. Jacob, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hello all. My name's Jacob. I am, like Sachin, one of the occupational therapists working at SpecialEffect. My main role is to help individuals with a physical disability to be able to play video games. So we do that through specialized means of equipment. So every single setup is completely tailored to the individual based on their movement, their condition, games that they want to play, and also kind of advising what kind of settings in particular games might be worth helping them to play better, which we'll be discussing today.
Brilliant. Right. Well, let's get into it then. I'm going to move over to your first slide and then let me know as we go through when you would like me to move on.
Sure. Cool. So, I'll wait to your... Yes, so today we're going to be talking about the SpecialEffect dev kit. So this was something that was compiled by other colleagues, and it's just about sort of gaining knowledge over the years about how to make games more accessible from a motor perspective. If you go to the next slide, it will just kind of break down all different categories. So yeah, so because there's so much information out there and different kinds of settings, we found that having to kind of group them together into these 7 categories was probably the ideal solution, and just kind of breaks down different kinds of settings that you can find within each of these categories. So today we're just going to be going through a kind of whiz tour about how to maybe implement some of these settings in some of the games, or just talk about some of the settings that could make games a bit more accessible. Okay, next slide. And then, so whenever we kind of speak to games developers, we are sometimes we often play their games, and then we provide some kind of some breakdown as to what kind of settings we might find is suitable for the game to include particular settings. And so to do that, we kind of highlight particular things of what they've done well, but also stuff that they could possibly include as well. So this is pretty much every single setting that is available within the dev kit, and it's also a free resource to check out if you just go to specialeffectdevkit.info, I think it is. Forgive me if that's wrong. But yeah, I think if we start with the input devices, I'll just talk through that. So next slide, please. Okay, so for input devices, we try and recommend that games have as many ways to play games through different means of controllers. Now, obviously, there's going to be limitations as to what console or what controllers will be permitted to use on particular consoles, for example, for PlayStation, Nintendo Switch, or Xbox. But for PC, seems like the world's their oyster, and you can include all kinds of different inputs. And so if you can include mouse and keyboard, as well as other kind of handheld controllers, but also thinking about the kind of accessibility controls that are available out there. For example, the PS5 Access controller, which was released last year, but also the Xbox Adaptive controller that was released, I would say it was 6 years ago now, since when I started. So yeah, these are the kind of devices that we use an awful lot in our line of work to help players to access their favorite games. And also just because particular people might find different kinds of inputs a bit more appropriate for them. They might find a particular style, size, shape of a controller more suitable for them, for their hands, for their needs, compared to others. For example, like if you think about the PS5 controller and the joystick positioning, and then think about the Xbox controller with their joystick positioning. It's a little bit different where the D-pad and the left stick are swapped over. Some people might find that a little bit easier to use, but obviously it's completely dependent on the person as to what they find the most comfortable. So yeah, it's all about sort of allowing your game to include as many devices to be played with your game. And then next slide. And then as well as kind of having all those controllers, you can also think about maybe including more than one controller to be used in games. So currently, you've got PlayStation and Xbox have got their own what we call co-pilot features, although now I think Xbox have changed to controller assist. Essentially, what we're talking about is allowing to use more than one controller to control player one. So if somebody needs to use perhaps a standard gamepad and maybe an accessible controller alongside it, then that is obviously going to be quite suitable for a lot of people, particularly if some people can only access maybe half a regular controller and maybe they need a few more joysticks or a few more switches to be able to play the game. So having that that kind of co-piloting of using two controllers to play games can make it a lot easier to be able to play them. But it's not just within the system settings that you can pair up to controllers, but also games like Horizon Forbidden West that came out a couple of years ago managed to implement this feature within their game where you can control the game using two DualSense controllers. But it's like as well for the PS5, if you think about the PS5 Access controller, you can also pair two Access controllers to work on PS5, but also you can also throw in a standard PS5 controller alongside that. So you can actually use up to three controllers to be able to play your games, which is quite astonishing when you think about how many peripherals that some person might be needing to play the games with. But yeah, it's all about using more than one controller to play these kind of games. Next slide, please. And then we've talking about what we call action mapping. So we're kind of moving on to being able to remap the controller. So what we mean by remapping is just swapping the inputs or buttons on a controller or keyboard to be able to create a custom layout for the individual depending on how they want it to be. So it's all about switching the buttons around, switching the joysticks about to make sure the person's got a more tailored layout to play the games that is more suitable for them. And I often see remapping as a gold standard feature. Whilst it's useful that it's in all the main console settings from a kind of what we call system level, so you can remap the controllers in the PlayStation menu, Xbox menu, Nintendo Switch menu. It's also really good to think about having them within the games themselves, just in case there's other little bits that individuals might need to tweak. For example, being able to adjust individual joystick directions. So rather than having the joystick act as its normal function, maybe holding it up might act as the triangle button, hold it down might act as a cross button on the PlayStation, for example. And so it's just giving players the ability to be able to have full control over how they want their controller to behave, essentially. But also you have games that have what we call southpaw or single stick options, because a lot of these games that people are playing now involve two joysticks. Some people might need to have a joystick function swapped over so that the left stick function is moved with the right stick and vice versa. Or maybe people need to play these kind of games using just one stick, which is also possible. I think Sea of Thieves did a brilliant job of being able to implement a single stick feature where instead of using two joysticks, they managed to figure out how to use just one joystick to move around in a first-person game, which is quite incredible to do, because there's so many people out there that might struggle to move two joysticks because they're such complicated actions for so many people with a physical disability. So being able to sort of remove that feature of having two joysticks down to one can open up so many more games for a lot of people if they can't use two joysticks in the first place. But also remapping options, not just for playing games sort of in the game, but also for menus as well, for navigating through setting up the game. You also want to maybe think about having the controls being able to be tailored to how you navigate the menus. For example, if you find using L1 and L1 and R1 to scroll through the different submenus, maybe they can use other buttons instead, or maybe even use the D-pad left and right, or maybe even a joystick to sort of reduce the amount of buttons that they might need. Next slide, please. So this is a screenshot from Spider-Man Miles Morales, which came out close to 4 years ago, I think it was now. And since then, we've had Spider-Man 2. But what we've got here is quite a complicated game, and that, oh, excuse me, got a bit of flapjack in my throat. Excuse me. Is that there's a lot of actions here that require two or more buttons to be pressed. And what we often tell people is maybe you can look for different ways around that sort of reduce ways where people aren't holding down more than one button at the same time. because then you're often doing that alongside pressing the joystick as well. And so we often find that people just find that very tricky to do. So we often tell people to maybe think about how many actions that require multiple button inputs to be pressed, or maybe give them the option to simplify actions where you need to press more than one button. And so to do that, if you go to the next slide now, we'll see that what Spider-Man Miles Morales has done really well is that they created shortcut options instead. And so what they've got here is you can assign the D-pad left and D-pad right to be these really complex actions where you are having to hold down 2 or 3 buttons at the same time. And it just means that rather than having to do such a complicated action, just that single press can perform it instead. And that is really good for managing fatigue as well. So many people we have worked with have very limited muscle strength. And so we want to be able to manage that fatigue level for them and be able to let them game for as long as they can. And in order to do that, maybe thinking about how many buttons being pressed in your games might be something to consider. Next slide, please. So then we also want to think about how many buttons are used to play the games. If we are working with somebody who may have never gamed before, or may be able to only be able to access a handful of buttons, then we want to think about games that do have a small amount of buttons to be able to fully play. And these very lovely screenshots are from Paw Patrol, the top one, and it's obviously Sonic in the bottom. So for Paw Patrol, typically you're just using left stick to move your doggy character left and right, and then pressing the X to jump. And occasionally you'll come across these scary little gaps in the pond where you might have to press one of the what we call the face buttons. So it can be A, B, X, and Y for the Xbox, or cross, circle, triangle, and square for the PlayStation. And so these actions are often just very minor things when it comes to these kind of games, but for the majority of the game, you are having to use one joystick and one button. And same for Sonic, which is just means that people can play these amazing games just by using just one joystick and one button. And there are also games that have reduced control schemes. So FIFA is one of our hard hitters that we often help people play. Instead of using the full controller, they now have options to have what's called a one button mode or 2 button mode, where you can play a whole match and play them online as well by just using 2 buttons or 1 button and a single joystick. And for somebody who can't access the entire controller, or access every single button, every single joystick available, then this is such a good way of being able to play one of the most popular franchises out there. And same for Street Fighter as well. So obviously fighting games are really complicated where you're having to press multiple buttons consecutively. They've actually included what we call a modern control scheme where you can press a single button and it will perform all the complex actions for you. And so it's just allowing the players to be able to play the games as they are meant to be played, but just with simpler setups and simpler button inputs. And then we go to the next slide. So then here we're also thinking about the menus as well. So how are you being able to navigate the menus? Are you having to use an array of buttons? Are you having to use a cursor? So it's all about thinking you want to make a simple experience for people to sort of get into the game to begin with, and being able to set up the settings that they need to have as simply as possible. So having the option to navigate all these menus with a left stick rather than having to use the shoulder buttons, which we've seen an awful lot of now, where a lot of games have to use, say, the LB and the L1 and the RB and R1 buttons to navigate through submenus. FIFA have included this option to use the left stick if you wanted. Same for using the right stick to navigate other menus within the game as well. You have the option to change that to the left stick, so you can navigate the entire menu just using the left joystick. And also for cursor navigation, we often want to say to people, well, if they can't access a joystick quite accurately, then maybe give them options to either adjust sensitivity so that they have a better chance of manipulating the joystick and be able to hover all over the options they want, or maybe have an option to change it so that you can use buttons or joystick to navigate through options instead. So again, it's all about tailoring to the individual and what they want to be able to get out of the game, and just what's simplest for them to navigate these menus. And then next slide, please. So when we talk about input interaction types, it's how you interact with a button. So are you pressing it? Are you double tapping it? Are you mashing it? Are you holding it? There's all kinds of ways that you can press a button. And so what you can do is maybe think about how players are interacting with the button. Are they having to do a single press to navigate certain actions, or are you having to hold it down? So what we find that press is certainly the easiest physical input, especially for not just those with a disability, but I think those without too. There's also options for a toggle. So what I mean by that is if there's an action where you have to hold down a button, for example, if you're aiming in a first-person shooter game, there's a lot of options now in these first-person shooter games where you can change into a toggle instead. So instead of having to hold down a button, you can do a single tap and it will enter aim mode for you. So it will basically act like it's holding down a button, and then you press it again and it will stop the action. So for people, again, going back to the simultaneous button presses, because holding down both triggers at the same time might be quite tricky, given the option to do a toggle for a button and then move on to pressing the fire button just makes it a lot easier for a lot of people. Continuous holds is a way of doing interaction as well, as also set duration holds. So you can decide how long you want to hold down the button before the action takes place. And also 2 taps or more. But what we're finding is button mashing is terrible, because I think even for anybody without a disability, I think it's still a pretty tricky thing to do, particularly long term, because I think it's a section in Metal Gear Solid 2 in the hardest difficulty where you have to press the X button for 2 minutes straight just to bypass that a particular segment, which I thought was just ridiculous to include. So if games do include button mashing segments, then we often recommend them to maybe think about, if they're going to include it, then maybe think about including another way to get around it. So Spider-Man did a really good job of changing it into a hold instead, or even skipping the actions altogether. So again, think about if you're physically able to press a button, but think about other people who might be struggling to access the controller in the first place. Okay, next slide. So then here we are talking about reducing the button inputs. And so what we can think about with the buttons is we can assign several ways of interacting with the button for a single input. So for example, you could have one button where if you press it, it does one thing, you double tap, it does another thing, you hold it down, it does another thing. And so this I think this is from Destiny. So this allows you to perform those kind of actions where you can decide how you interact with it. And so it's also what we call input stacking. So allows you to assign different kinds of button interactions to a single button, which means you don't have to worry so much about other buttons on the controller. So some people might prefer to have one button where you can press and do one thing and hold and do something else. So yeah, it's just having players then have a choice to decide how it's interacted, but also say if you come out of a menu, sometimes games will give you a little message saying there might be some conflicts because there might be different contexts in the game. For example, if you're driving a car and then suddenly you're out exploring, that's what we mean by a different context. So controller layouts might have different inputs depending on where you are in the game, whether you are sort of flying a plane or driving a car or exploring something. And so being able to provide that information where you can tell players that there's some conflicting information, you want to go ahead with that and give them a chance to sort of go back and then maybe take a look at what is conflicting. And so a lot of games do have that option. And then if we go to the next slide. So I just want to give a quick case study for someone we helped a couple of years ago. So this is Faye, and she has quad cerebral palsy. and she's got gross large movements in her left hand in particular, but her right hand is functional, and she's able to access the right side of the standard PS4 controller. And one of the main games she wanted to play was Shadow of the Tomb Raider. And so, whilst we were helping her, Faye, we thought that we want to be able to keep what she's already able to access pretty well. So we wanted to keep the PS4 controller, but we also had to think about how she could maybe use her left side to maybe access some buttons. And so what we ended up doing is providing some larger accessibility buttons called buddy buttons, and they're plugged into the Xbox adapter controller, which is the white box with the two DJ-looking decks on the table there. And we managed to get that working on a PS4 using an adapter, because you can combine the two controllers then using the adapter, which can then both work together. And you can also see sort of on the right by Faye's chin, she's got another joystick there, and she's actually using her chin to control the joystick, which is for the left stick movements. And so she's able to move her character around using her chin and then still use the right side of the controller. And so she also changed some of the options in this game to having button holds rather than tapping to bypass certain quick time events. And she's also got a toggle aim, so she's able to press a button to enter aim mode rather than having to hold it down, which means that she can fire a lot more easily. And then next slide, please. So analog sensitivity. This is where we're talking about joysticks and how much you have to perhaps move them. And so you've got what we call the inner dead zone and the outer threshold. So with the inner dead zone is how much stick movement is required before there's an input that happens. And so normally if you move a joystick, you have to kind of move it, a certain distance before your character starts moving. So a lot of games now have the option to sort of increase or decrease the dead zone so that the sort of more you move it, it'll start to move your character depending on where the joystick is moved to. And there's also the outer threshold, and so it's how much stick movement is required before what we call the action's max value is reached. And so that basically means for players who might find moving the joysticks difficult, you can maybe think about reducing the outer threshold, which means that they wouldn't have to move the joystick all the way to reach a maximum value. So you wouldn't have that means like you move a joystick a little bit, you start walking a little bit, then you move a little bit more, you start running. So a lot of games now have the option to move it a little bit, and then suddenly you're running rather than walking, which you normally would be doing if the settings were at their default. And so this also occurs for other joysticks that we work with. We work with larger joysticks for people who might need sort of much bigger movements, and also people who have more reduced strength. And so there are joysticks that require such a tiny amount of movement to move instead. So there might be some players who might need a large amount of travel within the joysticks. They'll be able to move it, quite a lot. But also people who might have tremors, for example, they might want to increase the dead zone because they might have tremors that might end up moving the joystick a little bit, and then it might involve the player sort of moving unintentionally. And so doing it in a dead zone means that they are able to move the character much to their control rather than relying on the game's standard default settings. And same for people who can barely move a joystick. So you might have people who can move it like a little bit, and so maybe you want to reduce the amount of travel where they move it like a slight bit, and then they start running instantly. So it's all about changing how much the player can move a joystick before that action occurs. Okay, and then if we go to the next slide. And then stick sensitivity, which has been around for a long time now. I think this is one of the sort of main head honchos of the sensitivity for joysticks or settings for joysticks for a while now. And so with a joystick, you've got the Y and the X axes. So by the Y axis, that means going up and down, and the X is going left and right. And so you might have people who can move a joystick up and down really well, but maybe left and right might be quite tricky. So given the option to individually change the sensitivity of both of these axes, on individually might make it a little bit easier for them to play. So ideally, we want to say that both sticks ought to be adjustable for both gameplays and also for menus. And then next slide. And then we move on to the information segment. So we want to talk about what kind of information is being displayed in the game, and also talking about settings as well, and giving a clear explanation about the settings. So this is from The Witcher. It's one of my all-time favorite games that I've plunged about 600 hours in. So you can see the controls on the bottom right there that show you how to control the main aspects of the game. But if you move into different contexts, for example, if you find Geralt is going in the water, and then those information for the buttons will end up changing to swimming techniques instead. And there could be prompts of an action that can be performed during certain circumstances. So we want to talk about how the button is performed to perform an action. So in God of War here, you've got, you can see there's a little word saying hold there, and then we hold the circle button. So for an action like this, you can change how you sort of finish off an enemy. So one of the options is holding down circle, another one is moving the joystick or left joystick forward, another one is pressing the L3 button. And whatever you change it to, that will be reflected on screen. So if you change it to the left stick click or L3, it'll say press L3. Or if you want to do it by holding down circle, it'll say hold circle. And then if some buttons are also remapped, you also want to make sure that that's also displayed on screen as well. So if the default button is X to jump, and normally it will display the X button to jump, instead what you can do is if it's being remapped to something like triangle, you want to ideally make sure that the triangle is displayed instead of X, because then that can cause all kinds of confusion. I know that the game Control, which is a confusing game to say based on because we often talk about controllers and controls, and so the game Control from Remedy is actually one of the games that does that really well, where you can change the control scheme however you want to, and then the button prompts will come up to what you've changed it to. And then next slide. So little things can, I think, remove a lot of frustration from games. So this is from Final Fantasy VII Remake. So it's also in Rebirth as well, which is the latest one. So remember in the last highlighted option, if coming out of a menu and entering a game, a lot of players will want to play around with settings and just sort of tweak and do some trial and error as to what they think is going to be appropriate settings for them when playing. The last thing they want to do is spend half an hour plus trying to figure out these settings. And the way you can kind of do that and make it a little bit shorter is maybe think about the last setting that was highlighted when they previously went into the menu, because if you kind of have to start from the top of the menu and you go into the settings and you're at the top of the menu again, go into another sub menu, you're at the top of the menu, but you've changed an option that's sort of right down the bottom of the menu. Just having little things like here where you can sort of press pause and then you can just press select how many times you need to, rather than having to scroll down. This can also do well for players who might have fatigue issues, and so we might find that having to remember stuff just makes it a lot easier for individuals. And also knowing when a setting's been changed can also avoid a lot of confusion. So from The Last of Us, part 1 and part 2, there's a whole host of options that you can adjust in there. And simply, you could just say on or off just to make it abundantly clear about what's been changed. And also given the option to reset whatever settings you've changed as well, whether that's going to be as a complete every single setting that you've altered, or maybe just a certain category of settings. So, for example, like in Last of Us, you've got combat accessibility here, being able to reset just that group, maybe keep some of the other options that you've already turned on. And so again, this is all about tailoring the experience and the controls to the player's ability. And then next slide, please. I wonder how many times we're going to be saying that tonight. So this is just a visual example of what a setting would do within a game. And it's just this is also from one of the videos in the dev kit as well, which is what dev kit's all about as well. So all the settings I'm kind of word vomiting you about, there are some really nice videos within there that break down each setting and provide some really good gaming examples for each setting that's been discussed. And so, yeah, players or developers can go one step further by not just providing a written description, but also a visual one as well. And then next slide, please. And we're going to move on to assistance now. So ways that you can adjust in games include ammunition if the game has all these. Ideally, if something's got a limit, then it can be adjusted in some way. So, for example, in Celeste, they've done an amazing job with this assist mode where you can change the game speed, so you can slow it down because it's such a fast-paced game that it just means players can slow it down to the speed they want to. So it can be 100% or it can be 90, 80, 70, 60, 50%. You can have as much stamina as you want because you have when you kind of grab onto walls, there's only a certain amount of time before your character will start falling down. And so you can have infinite stamina, as many air dashes, so you can sort of jump all around the game as much as you need to, because typically you're only allowed one when you're playing the game in its default setting. And also invincibility. So you'll do a lot of falling if you're playing Celeste. So what they've done instead is just have little hops at the bottom of the screen if you end up falling, and just means you can get back up to where you got to. So yeah, anything like that, just to make the game a bit easier for certain people who may just want to experience a story, because that's what people might want to do. They don't necessarily want a hard challenge. A lot of these games have such great stories that'd be a shame for players to miss out on them because they are unable to progress through the game due to some kind of disability. So, also, we've got a difficulty found in The Last of Us, and they've done also a great job in terms of adjusting each particular aspect of the game. So we can think about how the enemy behaves, how much health they have, whether they kind of spot you really quickly in the stealth section, how much resources you get when picking things up. Again, this is going back to Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which Faye was playing earlier. You can actually adjust the combat, the traversal, and the exploration difficulty. So you can have an easy combat, but then you might want to have the exploration a bit trickier. So you can change that to be a little bit more difficult if you wanted. And again, we're all down to tailoring that difficulty setup for the individuals. And also think about reducing or removing timing elements like quick time events, and again, altering game speed alteration, which is what we're seeing a lot of games now, not just Celeste, but Star Wars Jedi Survivor has done it, and as well as Spider-Man 2 and Ratchet and Clank. There's just loads of games that are now including slowdown to make it a lot easier to play. And then next slide. Okay. Sorry, the page doesn't come for me now. Here we go. Sorry. So genre-specific assists. So if you've got a platformer like Ratchet and Clank, for example, there are particular settings that could be appropriate. So, for example, a ledge guard, which basically means you wouldn't be able to fall off a platform if you are sort of if it's off camera. So you wouldn't have to you wouldn't walk off accidentally. Back to slowing down time, removing fall damage, more checkpoints. If you think back to the old Crash Bandicoot games, they've done a really good job of giving all those kind of checkpoints throughout the game. But also in the latest Crash Bandicoot 4, they actually have the option to remove the lives system, where you can just continue as long as you want to, rather than having to sub-level again if you run out of lives. Puzzle games, where you can think about removing the timers, providing hints, and maybe the hints get more progressively, more leaning towards the answer. Racing games, games like Mario Kart and Forza Horizon and Motorsport have done an amazing job of adding these auto accelerating and auto steering options and auto braking. And then first person shooter games, you can have custom aim assist, where when you press the aim button, it'll snap to an enemy. This is in control in the screenshot at the bottom right, where you can just press a button, it will snap to an enemy, so you don't have to rely so much on the right stick to move your aiming reticle as much. And also auto lock on when entering A mode, but also the reticle slowing down when near a target. So if you still want to use the right stick, but you find actually pinning the reticle on the individual quite difficult, then there's options where in games like Deathloop, and I think it also does it, where the reticle will slow down the closer to an enemy you get, just to make it a little bit easier to get rid of them, to put it nicely. And then next slide, please. Okay, yeah, I just want to talk about another case study of ours. This is a young chap called Leo. He also has quad cerebral palsy, like Faye does, and his left arm is weaker than the right. His main game he really wants to play was Mario Kart, and it's such a good game to include just because it's so popular, but also the settings make it so much nicer for a lot more people to end up playing it as well. So there's an option called smart steering, where you don't have to worry about steering the car. The car will just remain on the track the whole time. And there's also an auto accelerate option as well, where you don't have to focus on holding down the accelerate button. You can just move a joystick instead. And so for Leo, you can see he's got a switch and a joystick. This basically means that he can choose between one or the other if he wants to. So if he feels like for that day he wants to use a joystick, he can then maybe use the button for throwing items instead and still have the auto accelerate on. Or other way around, if he feels like not using a joystick but wants to be able to drive independently, he can hold down the button to accelerate, and then he can have the smart steering on, and the car will stay on the track the whole time. And so he basically has a couple of ways that he can play one of his favorite games. And then next slide, please. And then we come to, I believe this is the last category, simplification. So automating actions, whether this be digital or analog. What we mean by that, so digital is kind of where you press a button and there's only kind of one value to it. So it's not like a joystick where you move it around and you can decide whether the character's walking or running depending on how far you move the joystick. Same for the triggers. So like the further down you pull the trigger down on a racing game will decide how quickly you're accelerating. So there's loads of different ways that you can automate all these actions. So for example, in God of War, you have ways where you can skip these mini games where they do them automatically, because a lot of them do need sort of joystick precision, or they might need the circle button to be able to press to progress instead. Or you can just have it skipped and have it done automatically for you. And also action predictions, like an auto completing combos, like we talked about Street Fighter with the modern settings. That can be seen in also action games as well. The bottom left is from Dead Cells, which included an assist mode a little bit after its launch. And now it gives the option to do an auto hit option, so you can walk into an enemy and it'll attack automatically. Same for destroying doors, then when you press the X button or the A button to open a door. And what you can do instead is just destroys automatically as soon as you walk up to it. And so it just makes it a lot easier for people to focus on doing the controls that they are possibly better at doing. For example, moving a joystick and maybe having less reliance on these actions that might make it a bit trickier to play. And then next slide, please. And another automatic example, so from the Ghost of Tsushima, when you're holding the joystick up and you're going through all this beautiful scenery in Japan, you can actually navigate around trees, so you don't have to move left and right really accurately. Instead, you can just hold down the joystick and it'll sort of navigate around trees. Same as Spyro, one of the classic platformers. You can have the camera set to active, which means the camera will follow you around when you're turning left and right, so you're not having to use both joysticks at the same time. And that's been around since the original trilogy came out on PlayStation, and they still kept it in the Reignited trilogy as well. And next slide, please. And then we also want to think about other different ways to perform certain actions. So in Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart on the PS5, you got simplified traversal. So normally you have to navigate certain gaps, use certain gadgets by having a designated button for them. But what Insomniac have done really well is assign all these actions to a single button instead if you wanted. So you can just press a circle button and it'll perform all of these actions for you. So you've got the Rift Tether and the Swing Shot and the Phantom Dash and Hover Boots. They all normally have their own unique button, but instead they've done a really good job of grouping them all together instead. And it's just several actions also mapped to a single button. And yeah, it just gives a different way that you can perform actions where you can sort of stack different actions to one button. So it's like going back to what I said about the button interactions where you press and you hold and do different things. You can also think about just giving one button multiple actions depending on the context of the game. And then next slide. And this is just giving you a quick rundown of the SpecialEffect dev kit. So it just gives you ways you can navigate through it, but also gives you a checklist as well. So if there's some stuff that if you're able to put them in, it can sort of let you decide whether you or not you've included them. So it's all about making sure that maybe not missing anything out and just make sure that your players get the best experience to be able to play your game. And then next slide, please. I think it will now be the last slide for this. So yeah, so again, this is just a small little checklist of how to sort of get stuff. But obviously, this is going to be dependent on the developer's budget. So obviously, you can't include everything, but there are there's little things that you can include just to make it a lot easier to make it so players can access your game. But yeah, and I don't think I'll put in a thanks for listening slide, but I'll say it here. Thanks for listening. I may have gone over time, and I apologize for that. But it's been really good to talk to you all about accessibility in games.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Jacob. That was absolutely fantastic. And I do love the stories that you shared as well. It's always one of the highlights of my day, getting to see some of the the stories of the people that we've worked with. So thank you very much for that. So up next we have Sachin. Sachin, buddy, are you ready?
Yeah.
Brill. Right. So Sachin, we're going to be talking a little bit about Stargaze, I believe.
So yeah, I think when you mentioned to me, I think it was a couple of weeks ago now, but do you want to talk about Stargaze? I was just thinking about which case study to pick because there's so many good ones out there already. But there is a case study halfway through, and
Brilliant.
the Stargaze project isn't really talked about too much. It sort of flies under the radar a little bit. But the two main projects that we do at SpecialEffect is we call it the Lone Library Project, which is what Jacob spends his time on. So that one focuses on the video game side of things, especially to do with all the switches and things that you might have seen in that other picture. Um, Essentially, just breaking apart an Xbox or any sort of controller into different positions where people can access them. Because traditionally a controller is meant to be held with two hands, and it's quite difficult because a lot of the modern ones are quite, they just keep getting heavier and heavier. So yeah, there's definitely a need for this sort of equipment out there for people. But unfortunately, a lot of it is the knowledge base to actually source some of this equipment. It is a lot easier now, but yeah, in the past it was almost impossible to get your hands on some of this. Um, and then the Stargaze project is what mainly I do on a day-to-day, and that's for technology in acute hospital settings. Um, and if you go in the next slide, I'll explain a little bit more about this acute hospital setting that we spend most of our time in. Basically, what acute mainly means is it's the sort of treatment that people get straight after the traumatic injury, or well, a lot of the times it could be non-traumatic as well. Life being life, and anything can just suddenly happen to an individual, and they end up in hospital. Um, and we work with the severe cases that end up having complex physical challenges. So that last part there is just ripped from our website, where it talks a bit about how people lose that ability to be able to communicate following this. And that usually happens because of the tracheostomy, which basically that just means that their muscles aren't strong enough to be able to breathe themselves. And there's a quite simple surgical procedure that they go through, basically inserts a pipe through their throat, down their trachea, to be able to, a machine will either partially or in some cases fully assist with their breathing. And in those cases, they're not able to communicate at all. And they do have to go through a little weaning process before they're able to, use their own voice again. So a lot of our technology that we use when we come in, a lot of people want to be able to use that technology to be able to type, or, using things like on-screen keyboards, using the eye gaze to be able to type and make their needs known. And then they start going on to things like using it for leisure activities. And in this day and age, a lot of people have sort of phones on them all the time. And it's only when you have a disability suddenly that you realize that you're not able to have, this whole world that you once had access to is sort of ripped away. And it's not always addressed in hospital settings much because, in fairness to them, that they are trying to keep this person alive. So a lot of this extra stuff is often ignored until they're sort of medically fit enough. But when that does happen, the therapist gets in touch with us and our team go out. We assess them. We just bring all our kit and see what works for them. A lot of just chatting through about what exactly they want to access. And if you go to the next slide, I've put a little bit about how sort of we started. So you might, if you know about SpecialEffect, you'll definitely have heard about Dr. Mick Donegan. He is the founder of SpecialEffect. I want to say 2007, but I could be wrong. But it's over 15 years ago. And he when eye gaze technology was being developed, they were sort of looking at, how can this be used, for marketing, data analytics, sort of, being able to track someone's eyes has a lot of potential, especially if you're working in sort of an analytics company. But Dr. Mick, he saw it immediately how it can be sort of used for as an input device to be able to select things on a screen. If you are able to track the eye movement and then assign the cursor to be able to go and select things on a screen. So the first person I think he tried it with was Matt Hampson, and his was a rugby-related injury back in 2005, and he's one of our patrons now and has the Matt Hampson Foundation. So he's and his foundation focuses a lot on helping young people who, similar to him, had an injury doing sports. But yeah, he was a huge help in sort of showing where this can go. And one of our trustees, Rob, on the right there, he, I believe it was a road traffic accident when he was just 19, just before going to uni, actually. And yeah, his whole world just turned upside down. And Dr. Mick there in the picture, just that was the initial time Rob was able to do something himself, because his road traffic accident meant he had a spinal cord injury, and it was a high spinal cord injury. So yeah, he couldn't move anything below the neck at all. So it's very much using his eyes or nothing else at all. But yeah, it says a little bit about the, the reason why it was called the Stargaze Project is because you might have guessed it already. Because a lot of the people that we work with are laying flat down in bed, looking up at the ceiling. So yeah, instead of when we come in, it's a very different place that we leave them with, because they're not sort of stuck staring at the ceiling anymore. They've got something that they can interact with and do by themselves for the first time. Usually in a couple of months, because that's how long it takes before they're sort of well enough and stable enough to start doing things. So it'll show on the next slide, please, how why we sort of exist in the first place. So that there's a huge gap actually. The NHS are really good. They do have sort of eye gaze systems and sort of technology in place for communication, but there's nothing in place and nothing quick enough at the moment for people in intensive care. I think the last time I checked, in Wales at least, it's around 52 weeks before someone can be set up with an eye gaze system, and it's quite a lengthy process to sort of apply for that. And the people we work with as well, best case scenario, they do eventually get better, and they don't actually need the eye gaze system for that long. Usually around 5 months before they can start, if it is a spinal cord injury, they can start moving their arms with enough rehab. So we sort of stick with them throughout that process, because as you might have seen, we have so much in our kit. Once they usually let us know that they want to start using their hands because that movement's better for them, and then we sort of transfer over onto sort of adapting their setup to be used in different ways. And at the moment, the resources for therapists, especially speech and language therapists, because they basically speech and language therapists in this setting are responsible for the tracheostomy, the ventilator, and then also for the food intake as well. So they've got their hands full with trying to make sure the patient is alive. So a lot of the times it is often ignored, this extra world that people can't access, simply because it wasn't always the case. If we go back 20 years ago, everyone didn't have a phone in their pocket. It wasn't like, you know, I feel quite naked if I leave the house without a phone because my cards and bank details and everything that I need is on there. That's the one thing that I can't sort of leave the house without. Um, and the and the therapists, they get in touch, they're sort of in a lost cause almost, because it is almost like losing another limb in some cases where people are so attached to their families and things through their phone, through the technology, and when they're not able to get that, they are really much just trying to get any help that they can, and which is where we come in. And the two different approaches at the bottom there is the, the different therapists that we work with. They do sometimes ask if our equipment, such as like a joystick, can be used for rehab. So this would mean that the joystick is a little bit difficult to be used. And then the therapy thought is, oh yeah, they can just keep using that every day to build up the arm strength. But then the other approach is just giving them the easiest access method to be able to use functionally with the movement that they do have. And that very much sits in our approach. We don't want to make it harder than it needs to be, especially because we know they're going through a terrible part in their lives, and rehab and the sessions that they have with physios and stuff. A lot of people dread that session, and it's good to have something that you can do without having that dread coming in, where it's not work to do this. It's meant to be like a fun activity that they can do without the help of someone else needing to be there to facilitate that for them. So yeah, that's the method that we use. And this is on the next slide here. It's sort of the things that we leave with them. So anything that you'd be able to do on your phone, really. The main one that we'd focus on first is music, because it's quite music's quite a good way to be able to simplify an activity down to, do you want to pause, play, or skip a track? Um, and that picture there with all the square the square cells there, it's just an example of one of the eye gaze interfaces, and the way someone would click on it, it's by if they were using eye gaze, would be to dwell select it. So, if someone wanted to load up Google, they'd look at that Google cell, and there will be a sort of like a loading symbol on it, and we can sort of adjust that depending on what they need. Usually around 1.2 seconds or so, but yeah, that's sort of how you select things. Um, and yeah, we start with music, and we end up adding more and more things such as the games, Netflix, and eventually just full computer access where they're able to just load up Google and search things themselves. And then the next slide, just a little bit about the equipment that we loan. Um, it is more permanent provision can be put in place after it's no longer needed. So then, what that means is the NHS. So we do work with them in terms of if someone does need this for long term and they use it for communication, they will still be seen by the NHS, and the people. There's different hubs around the UK, and they focus on communication and environmental controls. So they will still see them, and we have sort of helped them with transferring over the interfaces that we used onto their new machines, and we can bring back our equipment to be used with someone else. But sometimes, if the person we're working with isn't using it for environmental controls and isn't using it for communication, they don't always meet the criteria to have their own. And in those cases, they can keep using ours until they're in a position where they can either source some of the equipment themselves, but that there's no strict time limit or anything. So they've always got our email, and that they just let us know that, if they want to add something new, um, and what their situation is. And we do follow people from hospital to a rehab center, all the way back to if they do get back home, we even follow them up at home. Um, just because some of this equipment is quite specialized, and we know, we can't just expect them to just take it along with them and hope wherever they end up next will set it up for them. So there is sort of a review process where we, make sure we check up on them, especially when they're going to a new place. Um, the best way, I should say, to show um, our process is with a case study. So if we go forwards 2 slides here, you should see Matt, and he is an incredible person that I was lucky enough to work with. I still to this day think about my work that I did with him, just because it's affected the way that I work with, even people that I see now. Um, so he, unfortunately, life being life, he had a road traffic accident while cycling. Um, it was, no one at fault, but we had a referral from the major trauma unit, and it was a spinal cord injury that he had. Um, and we had a lot of information on the therapist. We have a video call with them first. Um, and a lot of the things that they said pointed towards eye gaze being um, being the main access method, um, especially because he only had flickers of movements. So we very much had the thought that we could go in with eye gaze and see what sort of movements he can have, because at the bottom there that let us know he was using a call bell with his foot movements. So we're sort of thinking, so is there a way to sort of combine those two together, using your eyes to move the cursor and maybe using his foot to be able to click things. But on the next slide, it will show you what we ended up leaving with him. So we bring so much kit with us because we never know what we're going to be able to. I should say what is the best for them really. So we did do a lot of we tracked a lot of his hand movements that he had, his grip strength and things like that. And we noticed the flicker of movement that he did have in his right hand was strong enough to be able to move this thumbstick. So if you imagine a thumbstick that you have on, an Xbox controller, that's sort of ripped out of that and put in a housing, this thin, probably around centimeter and a half, in off his bed. He's able to rest his hand on that smooth Velcro tray there, and using his index fingers, just about able to move a mouse around the screen. And then when he lifts his finger off, similar to the joystick, it will just reset back to the center, and the mouse cursor will stay in whatever position he put. And that worked really, really well. So he had a tracheostomy and wasn't able to communicate. So he's using that to be able to type on a keyboard. And he was just using the predictive text to be able to write out full sentences and make his needs known. Especially because the biggest concern was getting attention. So there was even like a little alert noise that we set up so that he can move the cursor over that, click the button with his foot, and it will set off the alert noise. So then the nurse on the ward knows that he needed help with something. And him being a big fan of cycling, he had a subscription to GCN, which is basically like Netflix for cycling programs. And he was thrilled to, be able to put something on himself and have his time occupied by something other than just, staring at the wall in front of him. And a lot of the software that we use is on this Grid 3 program there on the bottom right. If we go to the next slide, please, it will show some of the grid sets that we have. And it's very customizable, so the sizes of the cells can be changed depending on what the user can use. So if we were using eye gaze, for example, we might notice that they're having some issues with hitting the top right side of the screen, so we can make those targets bigger than the bottom left. But yeah, he was able to get by fine with a cursor, so he was just he was able to have full computer control. The only things he couldn't do were sort of scrolling. So if you imagine, if you're using a mouse, you would have to hold down on the left click and push down. And often cases, the scroll bar on the right side of the screen is very thin, and he wasn't always able to put the cursor on there. So using the Grid 3 software, we were able to on the picture in the middle bottom there, on that right hand side, you can sort of see the green and blue cells on the right. So when he put the cursor on there and clicked it, it would do the scrolling for him rather than relying on a thin little bar on the right. It just meant that he was able to have control over things like volume and things with needing to go into settings, because oftentimes they are also very small targets as well. And the next slide, it will show his progression. So we did actually have remote sessions with Matt and his therapist there, as well as a second in-person visit, just to help him progress with his movement. So he was able to move his right arm completely fine on the second visit. So he wanted to stop using his legs to press the button, and we moved that yellow button to his right arm next to a joystick that we had. We just made it a little bit easier to be able to, go between clicking and pressing and moving the cursor around. And lastly, it's just a slide about basically just to thank the therapists and the NHS staff that we worked with there, speech and language therapists and the consultant there, who helped make all this possible. Obviously, we're not always on the ward 24/7, and these are the people actually there, and they are basically taking on extra work by getting in touch with us, and learning how to set all this equipment up. And the mental impact from this are, like, it's really hard to put into words really. But I've just put 4 bullet points to sort of get the main points of the mental impact from being able to have access to technology, to have access to games and other leisure activities. The first one is the being able to express your needs and emotions, especially for things like aphasia. Expressive aphasia usually happens either through a stroke or a traumatic accident. It basically means in their head they're communicating perfectly, but yeah, the words just aren't getting out right, or the words are jumbled, and it just gets really frustrated that no one's able to understand them. So having a way to sort of communicate exactly what you're thinking, really, for that person, it is a crucial part, because it encourages the ability to communicate instead of discouraging it, because they're seeing, oh yeah, people are understanding me, I should keep trying to communicate. And it's a key part to mental recovery, and just overall well-being. Just having that self-advocacy as well, is just promoting respect and dignity as well, because when staff are there, that they will ask yes and no questions. Sorry, Paige, sorry, just distracted by Paige's message. I
That's
gotta
all
wrap it
right.
up because I've been talking way too much. I'll skip to my favorite point here. It's just improved control, really, because a lot of people, they aren't able to control things themselves. It can be quite demoralizing in that situation, um, and being able to do something yourself without needing to ask someone for help with it is a huge thing for someone.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, Sachin. And sorry, yes, we were running out of time a little bit there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop us back onto our Discord screen. So if you've got videos, absolutely fine. If you don't, not a problem. So what we're going to do, so that everyone here can get off on time, is we're going to have a quick look at a couple of the questions that we've been given, and just do our outros for everyone here, and then we're going to watch the wonderful video that Topher sent in to us on Sea of Thieves and Rare, so that we can finish up, but so everyone else gets to go and eat some dinner. Brill. So, first up, thank you everyone so much for your time, for all your thoughts and all the hard work you've put into this. It's been absolutely incredible to hear. The couple of questions that we have, and I'm just going to pick 2 so that we've got time. In 30 seconds or less, can you tell me what gaming means to you? And we're going to go across the rows as I see it. So, Jacob, first.
What it means to me, gosh, I think I'll be quite lost without it. I think gaming is one of my biggest passions, and that's why I wanted to join Special Effect, because I want to be able to pass on my hobby to those who may not be able to access it as best as I can. So it's just giving everybody that equal opportunity to act to love something that I love doing myself.
Perfect. Topher.
I was gonna say community because, like, as being able to explore different games with different people, have that shared experience. But I've realised that a lot of the games that I play are quite, get stuck in a room, single player games, things like Civilization. So community is probably not quite the right answer for that one. But it's being able to explore new worlds, solve new problems, and that's what I love about gaming.
Perfect. For me, yeah, exploration I think is the perfect way to say it, because I am disabled and neurodiverse, so the world is not always built for people like me, but a lot of video game worlds are, or I can make them built for me. So it's very, very enjoyable and brings a lot of exploration to my life. Dom, how about you, buddy?
I would probably say it kind of changed my life. Without gaming as a career and as a hobby, I don't know where I'd be. Maybe in prison, maybe somewhere else. But when I first touched Mass Effect 1 and discovered that you could get a career from it, from a behind the scenes video, that changed me from an E grade student in GCSEs back in the early 2010s to now working in industry after 5 years of dedicated education around games, and then doing bits and pieces around industry. So I just absolutely love it, regardless wherever I'm, whether it's playing or working. I want to keep doing stuff, but equally give that same opportunity to everyone else. And without passing that 1 minute mark or 30-second mark, obviously the community, exploring, and all those other elements add to that. So yeah, that's my take.
Perfect, perfect. And Sachin, how about you, buddy?
I completely missed the question, to be honest. My Wi-Fi
That
You
is
30
inspired
seconds
by my
something.
work.
What does gaming mean to you? 30 seconds or less.
Oh, that's a hard one to put into 30 seconds, but if I had to summarize gaming, I'd probably say it has basically been with me ever since I've been born. I've been lucky. I'm going to sound really young, but my first console was a PS3, and it's it's been, I think I- I've been at this point where gaming, just before gaming became this global thing that it is now, it's just been incredible to be part of it. Where to the point where, it's definitely seen as like an everyday thing now, where everyone's a gamer now, whether that is on a mobile device or just console. But yeah, it's great to be part of it.
Beautiful. I loved everyone's answers. The other question we've got may have a little more discussion, so we've got to keep it as short and sweet as possible. I guess I can come to each of you unless you don't have anything to say on this one. So the question is, this is from a viewer. As an able-bodied gamer who doesn't use accessible features, what can I do to be more aware of what good accessibility looks like? Which is a good question.
Maybe I can jump in.
Yeah, go for it, Dom.
So I would say look up guidance. I know that PlayStation and Xbox are starting to implement accessibility tags.
Mm-hmm.
There are really great resources like the game Accessibility Nexus and Can I Play That do accessibility reviews. There are content creators and streamers who talk about accessibility on the daily. No doubt as well, obviously SpecialEffect associated streamers. So I would say, as someone who's looking to see what you can do, tap into those networks, signpost those networks, and really engage and captivate that knowledge and spread it across your own networks to signpost and spread the love, basically.
That was the perfect answer. Has anyone got anything else to add to that? Topher?
Yeah, I've got a. I'm sort of turning this back around. You say that you don't use accessibility features. I reckon you are, and you don't realize you are. If you've ever turned on subtitles, changed audio levels, changed your mouse sensitivity, remapped your controls, changed your difficulty, you've used an accessibility setting, and it's a great example of um, improving the experience in one area can have wonderful cascades and improvements to many more people. So that's my answer there.
Brilliant answer. Jacob or Sachin, anything from you?
I'll just not to play the dev kid trumpet again, but I think it's worth just take a look at that. 90 minutes, if you've got 90 minutes to spare, or if you want to use the YouTube times 2 speed, 45 minutes to get through all there with subtitles on, to easy digestible. I also think as well, just whatever game you have, just take a look at the menus, the settings, options, because a lot of time they'll have their own bespoke accessibility menu, and it's worth just taking a look at all that, because that just kind of gives you an idea what the game also includes, but then it just sort of just makes you aware as to what other games might also have as well.
Perfect. And Sachin, did you have any thoughts on this one?
I feel like everyone should go straight into the game settings just even before starting game, especially if it's single player, because everyone's play style and the way they play is so different that, you're probably going to be limiting yourself if you don't go into the settings and just take a bit of a look around just to see what could make the gaming experience for you just that little bit better, a little bit easier.
Brilliant. Yes.
I mean, just on a quick note on that, like Spider-Man 2 absolutely did something amazing with that last year, with like just differentiating which Spider-Man is talking and using the icons and using the different subtitles and color text to do that. And then equally as well, certain games are starting to really push that forward to players more now, because not completed it, so really bad on in terms of the bandwagon and everything. But Dragon Age: The Vanguard came out, and straight away, like before you customize your character, you customize your options, and accessibility is front and center there. So yeah, just to amplify that aspect, is it's definitely there. It's definitely open and optional. So take advantage and have a look.
Perfect. Yes, I love it when a game puts its accessibility right in the front. Okay, right. So we're just going to say any final words from any of you. We'll go across the line again. There is a question for Topher, which I will ask when we get to you. So, Jacob, any final words from you?
Thank you all for listening. I know it's been quite varied with everyone's talks, but I just want to say thank you for sticking it through, and thank you for supporting SpecialEffect if you ever have in the past.
Beautiful, thank you. Topher, the Wobbly Gamer has asked what's faster, a horse or an alligator?
You've muted yourself, Topher. You've muted yourself.
He's speechless,
No.
absolutely speechless.
Depends which one's got roller skates on.
Perfect, fantastic. And any final words from you, Topher?
I'm flustered to that question now. No, everything I've heard here today has been wonderful. I love any chance we get an opportunity to bring games to more players is one we should take. And yeah, I love the work that SpecialEffect does. I love seeing people, getting their life back, getting their fun back, and I think it's just a wonderful, wonderful charity. So thank you for having me on board today.
Thank you for joining. Sachin, any words from you?
Thank you for listening to my ramblings, really. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Thank you for coming here. And Dom, finishing up with you, any final words from you before we will go quickly to a BRB, and then we will show Topher's video before we finish up the stream.
Absolutely. Just again, thank you, everyone, for your time and ears today, or captions. I really appreciate it, and it's been amazing to do this collaboration with both SpecialEffect and Rare, as it's been a while being able to try to find something that aligns perfectly with our schedules and such. So really glad that this is the one, and absolutely looking forward to the future of what we can do. But obviously, and most importantly, it's a nice cherry on top to end with Topher's video about what Rare have been doing recently around accessibility, in case people are like, I came here for the Sea of Thieves. I want to pirate and find out how to do more of that in an accessible way. So I'm really glad, actually, we're ending off with a really nice, soft, but powerful video to the stream.
Brilliant. Right, well, thank you all so much for joining. I will let you go now. As I say, we're going to go watch Topher's video, and then you'll come back to me, everyone, before we raid out to a lovely supporter, as we normally do. So thank you all for your time.
Yeah, see you
Brilliant.
guys.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
There we go. Right, everyone. So, yes, I know you can't see me, but we are going to go over to Topher's video now.
How does a video game developer make games accessible for all players? Hi, I'm Topher Winwood. I'm a software engineer and accessibility advocate at Rare Limited, working on Sea of Thieves. I'm a white male wearing a black jumper and a white hat, and surprisingly long hair at this point. Today I'm going to talk to you about equal opportunity piracy, accessibility in Sea of Thieves, and how we've worked with SpecialEffect to make games that are inclusive as possible. So, who am I? I'm Topher. We've already done this, haven't we? I'm Topher Winwood. I'm a software developer and accessibility advocate at Rare Limited. Useless slide. Key thing is, I'm not an expert in all disabilities, but you don't need to be either in order to make a positive impact. So what is Sea of Thieves? Sea of Thieves is a shared world adventure game based around telling your own pirate tales. It's first person, and it's played in crews of up to 4 people as you travel the world uncovering secrets and hidden mysteries. We're going to be exploring a variety of disabilities today, but a common question we get asked is around players who are partially sighted or have no sight at all. How does a blind person play Sea of Thieves? My answer is, when part of a helpful crew, hopefully with a lot of laughter.
Y button.
There you go.
Look controller Y button. Unload cannonball.
Out in fire. I got.
Yeah,
I got
son of a controller Y button.
What a
Unload
shot!
cannonball.
Oh, that was like we're talking back.
There was no cue.
Y button.
There you go.
Look controller Y button. Unload cannonball.
Out in fire. I got.
So, what are some of Rare's goals for making an accessible game? Well, for a start, a phrase we use a lot here is parity of experience. This means that players with different abilities should all be able to play the same game. They should all get the same information. We're not turning on a setting which makes it easy for one player or gives a bunch more information to a certain type of disabled player that others wouldn't necessarily get. We want everyone to enjoy the same game. So on this, we want to make sure that we give players agency. For example, a blind player who can't navigate the world by sight. If we can give them audio cues to be able to follow, that's much better than just giving them teleporting options, which is a bit of a cop-out. And finally, we're backporting as well as looking forwards. The most accessible experiences are ones where accessibility was built in right from the start in the core design. Sea of Thieves, however, shipped 6 years ago. It's a bit late for us to be making initial decisions, but we can continue improving. As a live service game, we have the opportunity to make every update that little bit more inclusive than the last. Accessibility is a wide spectrum. You can't just make an accessible game. It doesn't make sense. No one game can be completely accessible. But what you can do is think of your target audience and support them as best as possible. For example, Sea of Thieves cannot be perfect. By design, some players may be excluded from the experience. If you have a fear of the sea or the ocean, maybe Sea of Thieves isn't the game for you. But we can always do better. We can always take on feedback. And as I said, as a live service game, every update gives us the opportunity to be a little more accessible. It's better to be a little accessible for some people than to not try at all and be inaccessible for everybody, though. So we've talked a little bit about philosophy and design. Let's talk about some of the features in Sea of Thieves that we've added to make the game accessible. A key feature that many blind and partially sighted players need from any digital experience is screen reader support. This is the ability for text on screen to be narrated out loud for them that they may not otherwise be able to read. In Sea of Thieves, most of our menus and text in-game has screen reader support, and we're always trying to find new ways to add more support. This was built and designed from the outset based on web standards, such as the narrator built into your web browser. And it can be controlled and navigated by an Xbox controller, keyboard, or mouse. We also provide settings like speed. If you've never heard a blind person using a screen reader at their usual speed, give it a listen. It's at a much faster speed than I think you'd expect it to be. One particular in-game feature that we've added specific blind accessibility support for is nautical narration, or narration on our compasses in the game. When using a compass by hand, typically you're able to hold it up to your face or look at the one mounted on your ship and see, am I facing north, south, southeast, or maybe I'm in a storm and it's spinning wildly. But that's all visual. We've added support so that when you lift it to your face, it narrates out loud. Now, importantly, this doesn't work in storms. Just like when you're looking at it, it would be spinning. The narration will say out loud, the compass is spinning. This is the parity of experience we were talking about earlier, where turning on an accessibility setting doesn't necessarily give you an advantage. We made it highly customizable. That means we've added delays or repeats that the player can tweak so it's just right for them. And we found this gives a lot of agency to blind players, say, who are steering the ship. Before, one of their crew members may say, turn right here, but now they can say, we're heading east, and let the helmsman figure out where they need to go. Our audio team has done a lot of work in making sure that all of the audio in the game is highly customizable, with lots of settings exposed so players can tweak as they need it. One great example is being able to choose between stereo and mono audio. Now, you may be wondering, how's this useful? How's this an accessibility setting? But say you're hard of hearing or deaf in just one ear, and there's a sound like gunfire coming from just one side. You may not be able to hear it. Mixing the game into mono means that player is able to hear in both ears the same sounds. We also allow the options to separately customize levels like voice, ambient sounds, and music. You may find that you have difficulty processing voices, and by turning down the music, it makes it easier for you to understand what other players are saying. We have an interesting setting around the sea rocks, where, large rocks out to sea, which your ship may crash into. They make a sort of crunching noise as you get near them, or you can hear the waves slapping against them. We added an optional boosting sound, which ducks the others and makes this much louder, and we found that blind pirates find that very useful when navigating out on the open sea. And as many items as possible in-game have narration, so say you go up to the cannon, it's going to say X, use cannon, load cannon, fire cannon, so you can always see what actions you're about to take before you take it. Here I've shared a tweet from Shasters, who used our Sea Rocks sound setting, saying, update, I just independently dodged a rock. My crewmate was AFK, and I may or may not have panicked slightly. Let's talk about motor controls. This is the sort of settings that we find SpecialEffect make most use of. It's important that all controls in the game are remappable to whatever key you need it to be. This is useful not just if you've got a custom keyboard setup, but say you've got a custom hardware setup, like you've got buttons on your for your feet or for your chin or elsewhere. Being able to customize every little bit of the game to a different button is invaluable for some of these players. We've got an auto move setting, so if you can't hold down the up button, maybe you get fatigue or you've got as I say, another custom hardware setup, this just simplifies that for you. We've made it so that some parts in the game which previously may require a hold can be used as a toggle on and off instead. And we've also provided a single stick navigation mode where the entire game can be moved around using one stick. We also have automatically floating water, which is more useful than it sounds. Say you get knocked off the ship and you don't have great control over your character and you're not quite sure where's up, what am I doing in the water, where am I going? The automatically float setting will bring you straight up to the surface, so you can see where you are. We try to consider color blindness in any sort of visual medium that we have in the game. A great example is the Alliance flags. They're all designed to have distinct shapes, color combinations, and designs. So that way, you don't have to figure out, is that flag red? Is it blue? Are they friendly? Are they not? You can have a clear understanding from a distance who's who. So, obviously, the reason we're here today is to talk about SpecialEffect, right? And the absolute wonder that they do for disabled gamers. Hopefully, they should have already rolled some videos before this, and you'll understand how amazing they truly are. And we have quite a special connection with them here at Rare. I thought I'd like to just take a moment to, share some photos of times we've interacted with them. We've been lucky enough to have SpecialEffect visit us at the Rare studio on multiple occasions now, and it's becoming somewhat of a yearly treat for us. They'll come in, they'll run a workshop, they'll explain the great work they've been doing that year, they'll give us some pointers on ways we can be improving, and people always come away from these workshops enthused and energized to, use that knowledge to make the best games we can and, support the people that SpecialEffect are supporting too. So we love that. You can see on the right a photo of us taking part in their Twin Town Challenge, which, as I understand, is a drive around France in souped up cars and crazy costumes, all to raise money for SpecialEffect, with many studios from across the industry taking part. Just recently, Rare sent out a contingent to run in the Oxford Half Marathon, a contingent that is considerably fitter than me, so all props to them, absolutely love it. And also, recently, we've joined SpecialEffect in One Big Game, which is another cross-industry event. It's 24 hours of football, non-stop, different studios playing against each other, all to raise money for SpecialEffect, and it's just wonderful seeing everybody turning up for that. So thanks for listening to me as I've given this quick whirlwind tour of accessibility features in Sea of Thieves and how we love to support SpecialEffect, particularly right now during their Raise the Game campaign, which I highly recommend you donate to. If you'd like to learn more about accessibility in Sea of Thieves, please go to seaofthieves.com/accessibility, where we lay out a bit more information. If it still doesn't answer your question, feel free to raise a support request at the bottom there. We read everything that comes through, and we love to learn more ways about how we can make the game better for you. If you'd like to learn more about SpecialEffect, I'm sure that they'll be plugging their website throughout the rest of the event, but if not, go to specialeffect.org.uk. I promise you, it'll be worth your time. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.
I mean, there we go. I didn't even need to do an outro. Topher did one for me. But, well, that was fantastic. I'd not actually been able to watch the video just before then, so that was brilliant. And yes, we absolutely love Rare SpecialEffect, and it's always a joy that we get to go and hang out with them, whether that's on streams, whether that's as part of events, whether that's for events that they are running. It's always a highlight to be able to go and meet the wonderful Rare team. But I'm afraid that does take us to the end of our stream. As you know, the other guests have already gone on to, well, mostly have dinner at this point in the evening for us, just about 7:20. But thank you all so much for coming by. Thank you for stopping by. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your time. And thank you all for hanging out during the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Yes, this was our stream for Raise the Game, one of Yuki's events that happens, I believe, every other year. And yes, we will be live again in December. I'm sure Maddie won't mind me saying, because we still need to finish planning it. But we will be doing a little tour of the SpecialEffect offices using some accessible kit called a 3, which is it's Zoom on a stick that can move by itself. We will explain and show you exactly what that means, both from my perspective using it and from Maddie's seeing it and having it follow her around the office. But yes, that will be some point in December. We will let you know some more details about that soon. But for now, thank you so much for coming and hanging out. We are going to raid over to Loudon Kerry. Now, Kerry is actually just literally this second starting her birthday subathon. It's her birthday, so please do say happy birthday. So let her know it's a Special Effect raid. She's one of our lovely supporters, and I believe will be taking part in Game Blast next year, so it will be lovely to go and hang out. But thank you all so much for your time, and we will see you again, well, probably in a few weeks. Bye!